those watching online, this is a presentation about infrastructure, developmental infrastructure districts. And Adam, if you do not mind doing introduction, I'd appreciate it.
All right. Y'all were on the Planning Commission role. Remember the Moncrief, they call it the 56 back here. It's the project Moncrief, McCoyne, and Rose Hill there. It's about 100 lots. But there were some off-site improvements required with the project, some roadway. Planning Commission talked about shoulder improvements, possible turn lane improvements. Of course, it also has water and sewer improvements they'll have to make to get to it. And there's a presentation for us on these residential infrastructure development districts. I think this is our second year the state of Tennessee adopted the provision for them. We'll do a good job explaining it more, but it's kind of a way for some of these offsite and the development costs to be spread amongst the property owners moving into that project. So that's the proposal tonight. I just wanted to give you all a good overview of it and see if that might be something we'd be interested. They would definitely be interested in it for the Goodlettsville 56 project. So.
Good evening. So Sarah Zare with MBS Capital Markets. My firm specializes in land secured finance. We've been doing it for the better part of, our professionals have been doing it for the better part of 35 years, first under our Prager name and now MBS Capital Markets. So we in general have issued bonds at $16 million of bonds for over 1,500 transactions for more than 500 issuers. So certainly this isn't part of what we do, it is what we do. And I personally am from Tennessee, spent the better part of my career doing general municipal finance here in Tennessee. So have, born and raised, spent time here, certainly understand what it is to be Tennessee. I always generally start these presentations out trying to give a history of our land secured tools here. Tennessee has long had a number of statutes for the ability to fund capital infrastructure for new developments. We've had Chapter 32, Chapter 33, Chapter 84. In particular, we've used Chapter 84, Part 1 through 5, which is known as the CBID, and it's hard to read, I think you have presentations in front of you, but which is known as the Central Business Improvement District Act, to fund a project that you may be familiar with known as Century Farms there in Davidson County. So we were able to bring the Tanger outlets right there in the Antioch area using a CBID. We're currently using a CBID on a Golden Bear project in Mount Juliet. So certainly the tool has been utilized. Just given the sheer amount of growth that Tennessee's experienced, the migration from other states to this state, the real intent and the purpose of amending and adding what is now Part 7 was to emphasize its use for residential development. So here we are with the, coincidentally, the Residential Development and Infrastructure Act of 2024. And if you look to the act, really it authorizes local government entities, which are defined in the statute as host municipalities, to establish by resolution what is known as an Infrastructure Development District Act, or district rather. We refer to them as IDDs. And the legislative intent of the IDD is to fund capital projects through the levy of special assessments within a specified area, within the district area. So oftentimes these IDDs, or these developments rather, are known to pay their own way. So those that directly benefit, which essentially are the landowners, so initially the developer, and ultimately the homeowners within the district are the ones that pay for the infrastructure. They are the ones that are benefiting, and so they pay for that infrastructure. I want to note that an IDD is in no way an independent government entity. So it's really intended that the host municipality, and again, the host municipality is a local municipality that levies and collects its own taxes, property taxes. And the intent is for this host municipality to bill, collect, and enforce special assessments as it would property taxes. So in no way are we creating some sort of independent entity. This host municipality retains control and complete jurisdiction over this area. So effectively what you're doing is you're drawing an area within your city and you're levying additional assessments on those that directly benefit from the public infrastructure that has been put into place. So that's a broad overview of what it is, and I know it's a lot to digest, but if you want to look to, let's see here, to remember the mechanics of this. Okay, if you want to look to the next page, what can a host municipality do through an IDD? So as I mentioned, a host municipality can essentially issue bonds to fund public infrastructure, really to support growth and the resulting need for residential development. Certainly that's not a business that the host municipality is, and we've experienced so much growth that there needs to be tools for that. And this certainly serves as a tool to support growth. When we define eligible projects, we're specifically talking about on-site and off-site public infrastructure. So in no way are we going to use these proceeds, bond proceeds, to fund public development costs. There are defined eligible costs that can be funded. It's usually, utilities. It's usually roadways. It's bridges, and there's a host of other public infrastructure, if you will, that can be funded that ultimately can be conveyed to the host municipality. So again, this is all pertaining to public infrastructure and not private development costs. So the primary source of revenue for these bonds are special assessments that again are levied on those within the district that specially benefit. Again, I allude to the fact that growth pays for itself or the development pays for itself, because those that are benefiting are ultimately the ones that paying for this infrastructure. These special assessments do constitute a governmental lien. So they are senior in lien to all other liens except for your state and local taxes. And similar to property taxes, a governmental lien, the enforcement provisions are foreclosure and tax sale. Again, a point that I want to note that the issuers, these are limited obligations of the issuer. The municipality, the city is not on the hook for these special assessments. Your sole obligation is to collect special assessments as you would property taxes, and in the event there's a deficiency, to enforce the provisions of the foreclosure or tax lien sale. So in no way are we going to ask you to cover any sort of the revenues required to pay the bonds. Again, this is a limited obligation. Oftentimes we have, and we've done this with the two transactions that we're working on now with Century Farms and Golden Bear. We create the distinction, and the legislation allows us to use the Industrial Development Board or your public building authority to issue the bonds. And that really kind of creates a distinction between, I'm not issuing an essential services type financing. It's not a water sewer. It's not a general obligation bond. It doesn't have the full faith and credit of the city. This is truly a development financing backed by special assessments. And a lot of our issuers tend to go in that way to kind of create that one degree of separation, if you will. And the legislation allows for it for that very reason. I reiterate, so ultimately, as the host municipality, your primary role is to levy and collect the special assessments just as you would the property taxes. The legislation recognizes that as administrator, they're permitting you to set aside about 5% or up to 5% of the special assessments to pay for any sort of administration costs. Now, oftentimes, even that role or the burden of what does it mean to administer this is often delegated to a third-party administrator. I think Phil just walked into the room, but I would say on 99.9%, and please don't quote me on that number, but Phil is on our transactions because essentially he takes the administrative role. He does everything you need that's related pertaining to this bond deal. He makes sure that your tax roll is correct, any sort of credits that need to apply, anything that the bond indenture may require. He gets it all ready for you and effectively hands over what you're accustomed to, which is, ready to go tax roll. And your job really is to just send the bills out, and it has a special line item on it with the special assessment. And Phil, feel free to jump up and say anything you want regarding your role. But we truly value that role, and investors tend to value that role because a lot of times the burden of administration, if it's handled by a third party, it really kind of makes sure that all of the bond indenture, the provisions of the security are being handled correctly, that everything's going to run smoothly. This is just business as usual. So that the legislation recognizes that and has allowed for a third-party administrator to be involved. Let's see, again. You guys are going to start judging me for not figuring out the arrows here. Oh. Okay. I've missed it. Okay. So with that being said, what is the benefit of an IDD to the host municipality? Again, we allude to the fact that growth pays for itself here. You're really able to fund stable infrastructure projects without tapping the host municipality or the city's future growth in taxes, like if you're familiar with a tax increment financing, any sort of future growth in taxes as a result of the development is usually diverted to a financing. That's not happening here. There is no tapping your budget to fund this. This truly is an opportunity to accelerate projects at no financial burden to the city. So it really becomes a financing tool for the very purpose that the legislation has indicated, that we're recognized there's growth, we need efficient way to fund that, and we need to make sure that with all of this growth that's going on that we properly put in place residential developments. I'll also allude to the fact that, the burden is not spread across all of your taxpayers within the city. Again, this is those that benefit, those that directly benefit from the infrastructure are those are the ones that are effectively paying for the infrastructure. So those within the boundaries of the district are ultimately responsible for payment of special assessment. So it really truly becomes a tool to fund infrastructure from those that directly benefit from it. I go back to the host municipality will always retain jurisdiction. You do not lose control. Your zoning, permitting, decisions related to the IDD, these are all within your jurisdiction. These are all your decisions. So I am not creating not me personally, but we're not creating some independent host municipality that's going to run and do what it wants to do, and you've lost complete control. The IDD has been set up to have to run through the host municipality. And again, I'll allude to the fact that 5% of the special assessments have been set aside for any sort of administrative costs that run to that responsibility. that is often, again, as I mentioned, administered by a third party, such as Phil's company. I'm happy to, so this is a page that pertains directly to you and the benefits. I'm happy to keep going and we can ask Q&A at the end, or I can continue to kind of say, what does this mean for our residents within the community? Let's see. I'm messing up entirely. Apologize. Okay. So again, the residents are ultimately the ones that benefit from this infrastructure. And so they're going to see that value in projects that wouldn't have been funded and projects that are accelerated. Sometimes the ability to use these proceeds to fund other projects afford the opportunity to create more amenitized, a more amenitized community, whether it's landscaping, amenities, et cetera. But ultimately, the concept is they benefit from this infrastructure, and ultimately that is realized in their property values. And another point to be made is it's not realized, the cost of that infrastructure isn't realized up front in their home prices. It's actually funded over a 30-year period because we're issuing bonds. And truly, assessments run with the land. So you only pay for what you use. So if I'm a homeowner and I'm in my home within this district for 5 years, I'm only paying for five years of assessments. I choose to move, I no longer am obligated. The debt runs with the land. Assessments run with the land. I'm no longer paying those assessments. If this is my lifetime home, I'm paying the assessments for a 30-year period. Bond transactions usually have a 30-year term. But sometimes I say to myself, okay, well, I don't really want to carry debt for 30 years. So we always have this prepayment option. So you're always afforded the ability to say, listen, I get it. I have to pay for the infrastructure that's benefited me directly, but I don't like to carry this debt. Please let me prepay. That option exists. So a lot of homeowners, the ones that know they're going to stay there forever, choose to prepay their. Actually, most choose not to do it, but anyway, that's another point.
If they prepay and let's say something unfortunate happens, like there's a catastrophe or they pass away, what happens at that point?
There's no longer debt that runs to that piece of property.
Well, I'm saying if they prepaid though, and they paid it up, and either they sell the house or they pass away.
So there's the risk in prepayment in that,
Okay.
like, if you move, you've already paid for debt that you didn't necessarily have to afford,
That was
right?
one of the answers I was looking for.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you pass away, unfortunately, you've paid for debt that you didn't necessarily.
Gotcha.
So most, unless a lot of time in our age-restricted communities where they just say, hey, I don't have a mortgage. I know I'm going to be here forever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like to carry debt. Maybe then you might have a prepayment, but quite rarely do we have people actively saying, yeah, I'm going to pay off this debt.
Gotcha.
And usually the assessments that run to the property are a minimal amount that are folded into your mortgage. So there's only so much that we can't come in to a market and say, we're going to charge you $100 million. It's only so much that can be passed through before you start to
Gotcha.
have people say, I'm not buying into your community.
Just curious.
Yeah. Again, these assessments aren't a secret. You are required through the statute and required, honestly, as builders and developers to disclose it. So in no way are you surprising this, or no way are you hiding it. These assessments are fully disclosed as you buy into the community.
I guess I'll ask a question now. So when you talk about the terms of it, can the terms ever be extended, or who manages and
The
sets
30-year
those standards?
term?
Yeah.
So we're MBS Capital Markets is an underwriter,
Okay.
and we structure, market, and sell the bonds. A 30-year term by statute is required. That's the maximum term you can go, but also investors are very accustomed to spreading this debt over a 30-year period, and it also helps with the affordability of not necessarily compressing debt within a shorter period of time. So 30 years is a very standard term for these type of bonds. Yeah. And to the, now jumping into just like a mortgage, if you find yourself issuing the bonds in a high interest rate market, you can go from high to low. You can refinance it and within there's certain provisions, there's usually call protection, but it almost acts the same. So we're always trying to make sure that we pass through the best deal to our in-home users eventually, or to those that are in the district.
So the people that are, so the people that are getting a 20-year mortgage, usually it's a 30-year mortgage, but the people that are getting a 20-year mortgage, would you recommend that they just do it in that 20-year term, or?
So
just
they
still-
all, if the bonds run 30 years, then the assessments run 30 years. Now,
Okay.
they have the ability to prepay at any time. So year 2, they say, I'm done with paying this assessment.
Okay.
I'm going to prepay it.
Okay, so
Year 20, they say, okay, listen, my mortgage is out. I feel like prepaying.
Okay.
They have the ability to prepay at any time. But the two aren't necessarily, the mortgage term is not necessarily tied to the bond term.
but can they set it on a monthly rate where it runs out in 20 years? Does that make sense?
No, they
Just-
can't. The bond terms are set the way they are.
Okay.
It's just the option to prepay exists.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
So the 5% of the special assessment to administrative fees, that 5% totally goes to the third-party administrator?
Yes, to the extent you have a third-party administrator that, go ahead, yeah, please, yeah.
So the way we would envision it is that 5% goes to the city and you guys keep it all. We would figure how to get paid out of the assessments is what the plan would be. And for the record, I should have said Phil Hunt with Raphael Hunt and Associates. So I own a company with 60 employees and we manage about 230 of these districts. So this is what we do in this particular process in a place like Tennessee, which is where I'm working a lot right now. We would serve several roles on the front end. We would actually do what's known as the assessment methodology report. She may have already referred to that at the beginning. It's we take the engineering costs with the engineer's help, with the underwriter's help, and then we figure out the method by which all the properties would be assessed based on the way they benefit from the property, from the infrastructure programs. That's the first thing we do. That assessment methodology report becomes the basis for the bond issue. The next thing we're going to do is the process requisitions. Again, our job is to take every bit of the work off of you and your staff, okay? So when you do the bond issue, you guys are on the bond issue, the money goes into trust account. We would help administer that. Developer would pave a mile of roads. We would get a requisition from his engineer that says they paved a mile of roads. There'd be a bunch of invoices attached, lien releases. We would check it against the engineer's report, check with the bond attorney, make sure it's all legally allowable, and then we would submit that to the city and say, this requisition is good to go. Your city inspector might want to go out and check the mile of road to make sure it is indeed there, and then come back and say, yes, we're good to release that draw this month. So we would do that too. The next thing, and the biggest lift really, is the assessment rolls. Each year, we would maintain the assessment rolls on this property for the next 30 years. You've got properties trading hands. We would do the estoppel letters between title companies and the properties that are changing hands. Each year, we would certify that to the tax collector office, whether that's the city or the county. We would do that for you guys for the next 30 years. And then finally, the SEC requires continuing disclosure each year. We would prepare the continuing disclosure and submit that to the SEC on your behalf. And one thing I'd like to go back to is this is really just a finance technique. That's all this is. Sarah kind of referred to it a while ago, that we don't usurp any police powers or zoning or permitting or development approval. That's right. This is strictly a finance mechanism. We don't usurp anything else. Right.
So we're running short on time, but I'm going to go back to something you said. So the 5% administrative fee would stay with the city.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The issuance of bonds would go through the city is, I guess, will they use our bond rating, or is this just something?
No, so that's actually a great question. So these are standalone issues, kind of like a conduit issue, like an IDB authority.
Okay.
We don't use the city or the county or the state's rating. All of these bonds are issued unrated. And neither would a default of these types of bonds in any way affect your debt capacity or debt ratings. We lived through this in 2008 in Florida with a few defaults, as you can imagine back in those days, and no city or county that had created a district had any effect on their debt rating. So this is strictly issued based on the assessment strength of that development. The rating agencies in Wall Street are very sophisticated. They know that instead of the city of Goodlettsville being on the hook, it's really 100 acres of land that happens to be in the city of Goodlettsville, and that's their only security, is to foreclose on non-paying assessment properties in that district.
You have more faith in them than I do then. But anyway, like I said, we're kind of at the end of the time that we had set for this, and I'd like to see if any of our commissioners have any other questions.
Commissioners, questions?
No, please, thank you.
I've asked the only question I needed, so with that being said, thank you so much for the presentation. Appreciate you guys coming out, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again in the future soon. So anyway, thank you so much.
All right, thank you all.